The retirement unit was quiet until he said one sentence that no one there was ready to hear. He walked past kennel after kennel of retired K9s that didn't bark, didn't beg, just watched with tired eyes like they'd learned hope was expensive. The staff called them do not place. Too driven, too stressed, too risky, dogs that still moved like they were on duty, even with gray on their muzzles. Then the man stopped, looked down the row and said, "I'm here for all of them. Not one, every retired K9 you have, the ones nobody wants." The room went dead silent. And that's when the first dog, the one that hadn't stood up for anyone, finally rose to its feet. Before we start, please subscribe. When we hit 100,000 subscribers, I'll be buying a dog I truly admire, a Tibetan Mastiff. Let me know in the comment. Do I have bad taste, or is that a solid choice? The first dog he saw did not bark, even when the door opened and cold air rushed in. It stayed on its bed like it had learned that noise never helped, and it watched the room with eyes that looked older than the rest of its body. One ear tipped forward, the other sat slightly back, like it was listening to two different worlds at once. The kennel tag on the gate was clean and official, but the dog's collar was faded from years of hands grabbing it in a hurry. When the handler walked past, the dog's chest lifted as if it wanted to stand, then it stopped itself, like it was tired of hoping. The man who walked into the retirement unit that morning did not look like someone there to adopt a pet. His clothes were plain, his posture steady, and his face held that quiet focus people get when they have trained themselves to stay calm under pressure. The staff thought he was another officer, another visitor, another person coming to check and then leave. They were used to that. People came in with big feelings and left with small excuses, and the dogs learned not to believe promises. He moved down the row slowly, reading the kennel cards without rushing, and the dogs noticed that detail first. One dog pressed its nose against the bars and breathed in, then backed away as if it had already been disappointed too many times. Another stood stiff and still, paws planted like a statue, eyes locked on the man's hands, not his face, because hands were what decided everything in a working dog's life. A third dog paced in a tight line, not because it wanted out, but because it did not know how to stop being on duty. The man stopped at the first kennel again, the one with the silent dog who did not bark, and he crouched without touching anything. He did not speak right away, and that made the dog lean forward just a little, as if silence felt safer than strange kindness. The dog's nose twitched, its eyes narrowed, and for a moment it looked like it might turn away, like it always did when people got too close. Instead, it held the stare. The handler nearby shifted his weight and cleared his throat, trying to sound casual while also warning him. "That one's been here a while," he said, like it was a normal fact. "Doesn't place well." The man nodded once, still looking at the dog. "What does that mean?" he asked, calm, not challenging but not accepting the answer either. The handler hesitated, then gave the version people always gave when they wanted to close a conversation. "Some of them come back. Some don't adjust. Families want easy. They want a dog that forgets work. These dogs don't forget." The man's eyes stayed on the dog, but his attention widened, taking in the kennel card, the water bowl, the way the dog had positioned itself so it could see the door and the hallway at the same time. He noticed the small scar near the dog's shoulder where a harness buckle had rubbed for years, and he noticed the paws, thick and worn, the kind that had run hard on rough ground. He noticed something else too, something the card did not explain. The dog was not acting unadoptable. It was acting like it was still waiting for an order it would never get. He stood and kept walking, and that was when the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small way animals react when they sense a decision forming. A dog 2 kennels down sat up straighter. Another dog stopped pacing for half a second, ears lifting. The silent dog tracked him with its eyes until he reached the end of the row, as if it needed to know whether he was leaving like everyone else. At the last kennel, an older German shepherd rose slowly, joints stiff, muzzle graying, and it did not press forward. It simply lowered its head and stayed still, the way trained dogs do when they are trying to read someone without giving anything away. The kennel card had more notes than the others, and the staff had underlined one line twice. High drive, high stress, not recommended. The man read it, then looked at the dog, and the dog looked back with a kind of tired pride that felt like a uniform it could not take off. Retired, the man said quietly, as if the word was unfair. The staff member with the clipboard stepped closer, polite but guarded. "Are you here for one dog?" she asked, already preparing to guide him toward the easiest case, the one that would not cause trouble, the one that would make her day simpler. He looked at her then, and his voice stayed even. "I'm here for all of them." She blinked like she had misheard. "All of them," she repeated, not sure whether to laugh or call someone. He nodded once. "Every retired K9 you have," he said. "The ones no one wants. The ones you keep in the back because they scare adopters. The ones you say do not place because it protects your paperwork." A silence settled over the room, heavy enough that even the dogs felt it. The handler gave a short breath through his nose, half disbelief, half warning. "Sir," he began, "you can't just. These are working dogs. Some have bite history, some have trauma, some are medically expensive. This isn't a weekend decision." The man did not argue. He did not defend himself with emotion. He just turned back to the dogs and let the truth sit there without dressing it up. "I know what they are," he said. "That's why I'm taking them." And at that moment the silent dog in the first kennel finally stood, not rushing, not jumping, just standing fully for the first time since he walked in. Its body was still tight with caution, but its eyes had changed, as if something inside it recognized a tone it understood. Not pity, not excitement, purpose. The staff member stared at him, still stuck on the impossible math of food costs and vet bills and space and risk. "Where would you even put them?" she asked, voice low now, like she was afraid to hope for something that would collapse in a week. The man's answer came after a pause, and it was the first time he sounded like he was carrying something personal. "Somewhere clean, maybe my house," he said. "Somewhere built for them. Somewhere they don't have to beg for a quiet corner and a cold bowl." The room went quiet in that way spaces do when something irreversible is being considered. The dogs felt it before the people did. One stood straighter. Another stopped pacing entirely. The silent dog held Evan's gaze without blinking, like it was waiting to see if this was another moment it would have to survive. "We'd need transfers," the woman said finally. "Liability waivers, vet clearance, proof of housing. This isn't adoption. This is a permanent responsibility." Evan nodded. "That's what I'm offering." It was not a promise polished enough to inspire confidence, but it was real, and the dogs seemed to understand that difference better than anyone in the room. But the dogs had already decided not to let him leave with less than all of them. The first kennel door did not swing open dramatically, and no dog rushed forward when the latch lifted. Instead, there was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to test whether something is real. The handler stepped aside, expecting hesitation or resistance, but what followed was neither. The dog inside stepped forward slowly, head level, eyes alert, body prepared for correction that never came. It stopped at the threshold and looked not at the hallway, not at the staff, but at Evan. He did not call it. He did not snap his fingers or lean forward with encouragement. He simply stood there and waited. The dog crossed the threshold on its own. That movement changed something in the air. Another dog 2 kennels down stood immediately, ears lifting. A third shifted its weight and turned its body toward the open gate, not pushing, not crowding, but paying attention. The staff felt it too. This was not the usual tension of dogs testing limits. This felt coordinated, as if something invisible had aligned between them. One by one, the gates opened. Some dogs stepped out and held their position beside the door, still uncertain of what the open space meant. Others moved in slow arcs, checking corners, mapping exits, memorizing the shape of the hallway as if it were unfamiliar terrain. None of them barked. None of them displayed the erratic excitement the staff had warned about. What they showed instead was controlled awareness. Post was the last to leave his kennel. "That's a weird name for a dog," Evan said, but not loud enough. He stood just inside the doorway for several seconds, body rigid, ears catching distant sounds. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on Evan. Not questioning, measuring, Evan did not move toward him. He shifted slightly to the side, widening the space instead of narrowing it. Post stepped forward. The handler inhaled sharply. "He's never done that without a command," he said under his breath. Post stopped just short of Evan and angled his body slightly, positioning himself not in front of him but beside him, facing the corridor. It was subtle, but clear. It was the stance of a working dog assigning itself responsibility. Evan did not touch him. He simply stood there, allowing the placement to exist without correction. When the transport vans arrived, the staff expected chaos. Instead, the dogs loaded in a sequence that felt almost deliberate. Evan allowed each one to approach at its own pace. If one hesitated at the ramp, he adjusted the angle. If another froze halfway up, he stepped back and widened the path. There was no pulling, no dragging, no raised voices. The pacing dog from earlier paused at the entrance of the van, nostrils flaring. Evan stood to the side and lowered his posture slightly, softening his frame. The dog stepped forward, entered, and turned around to face outward, scanning the lot until the last dog approached. Post did not enter until every other dog had loaded. He stood near the rear bumper, head turning slowly, confirming positions, tracking movement. Only when the last dog settled did he step into the van and sit near the front partition, body angled toward Evan. The handler noticed and shook his head quietly. "He's still organizing them," he muttered. The drive was long and mostly silent. The dogs did not whine or shift restlessly. They remained upright for much of the trip, bodies braced but controlled, watching the passing landscape through narrow windows. It was not fear that held them rigid. It was a habit. Halfway through the drive, something changed. One of the older dogs lowered itself fully onto the mat for the first time. The movement was slow and careful, as if lying down without instruction required permission. A second dog followed minutes later. Eventually, even the pacing dog settled into a seat that did not look temporary. Post remained upright longer than the rest. He stayed near the front partition, eyes tracking the road ahead through the small gap beside the driver's seat. Evan could feel the gaze, steady and unwavering. It was not distrust, it was vigilance. When the facility finally came into view, it did not resemble a kennel complex or a traditional shelter. It was open land bordered by trees, the building wide and clean-lined, windows high enough to allow light without overwhelming movement. No chain-link fencing, no narrow corridors. The gravel drive was smooth and wide, allowing space to maneuver without crowding. The driver parked and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was different from the one in the retirement unit. This one felt open. He stepped out first and opened the van doors fully, no leashes, no force. The first dog descended carefully, testing the gravel with its paws. It circled once and stopped, nose lifting, taking in the scent of untouched ground and fresh wood. Another dog followed and moved toward the building's entrance, not rushing, just curious. Post remained inside for a moment. He looked outward, scanning the tree line, the roof line, the horizon. Only after that did he step down, moving past Evan and into the open space. He walked the perimeter slowly, head level, tail neutral, mapping territory that did not yet belong to him but did not reject him either. Inside, the facility had quiet, wide floors, soft lighting, no echoing metal gates. Each section was open but defined, allowing dogs to see each other without being forced into tight proximity. Water bowls already filled. Beds spaced deliberately, not crowded. The dogs entered in a loose formation. Some chose corners near windows. Others positioned themselves near doors. A few stood in the center of the room and simply observed, unsure of what came next. There were no commands to sit, no directions to settle. Evan removed his boots and sat down on the floor near the wall, back resting against it, hands open and empty. He did not call them. After several minutes, one dog moved closer, stopping at a safe distance. Another lay down near a window, head resting on crossed paws. The pacing dog circled once, twice, then lay down fully for the first time since leaving the retirement unit. Post finished his perimeter check and returned to the center of the room. He stood there for several seconds, body still, listening. Then he lowered himself slowly to the floor. It was not dramatic. It was not a collapse of emotion. It was simply the first time he had allowed his body to rest without bracing for recall. The staff who had followed behind to observe stood at the doorway, silent. "They're not acting retired," one whispered. Evan did not look up. "They're not," he said. "They're adjusting." As the afternoon light shifted across the floor, the dog's breathing slowed into a rhythm that felt almost synchronized. No barking, no posturing, just quiet presence. The first night did not feel triumphant. The dogs did not explore like animals in a new yard. They moved like professionals entering unfamiliar ground, each one mapping angles and exits before committing to rest. Some chose spaces near walls where nothing could approach from behind. Others positioned themselves within sight of the main door, not because they feared what was inside, but because habit demanded someone hold that line. North remained near the central walkway, body angled toward the entrance but close enough to the others to track their breathing. He did not lie down immediately. He stood for a long time, head slightly lowered, listening to the rhythm of the building settling around them. Evan stayed on the floor with them. Not in the middle, not claiming leadership, but off to the side, back against the wall, boots removed, hands open. He understood that proximity without pressure meant more than touch. These dogs did not need affection forced into them. They needed stillness that did not disappear. Around midnight, the pacing dog from the retirement corridor began to move again, claws tapping against the sealed floor. It was not frantic, just restless, like its body did not know how to power down. Evan did not stand. He simply shifted slightly, adjusting the lighting lower, reducing shadows near the door. North noticed before anyone else. He rose, walked once around the pacing dog, not correcting it, not blocking it, just moving in a slow circle that narrowed the pattern. Within minutes, the pacing shortened. The movement slowed. Eventually, the dog lay down without instruction. Evan watched the exchange without interrupting. This was not chaos being controlled. This was order being restored. By morning, something subtle had changed. The dogs were not relaxed in the soft way pet dogs relax. They were composed. Their breathing was deeper. Their posture no longer carried the tightness of holding a position that no longer existed. When the sun came through the high windows, North finally lay down fully, stretching his body in a way that left his ribs exposed instead of protected. It was the first vulnerable posture Evan had seen from him. That small detail mattered more than anything spoken aloud. The news did not break the way scandals do. It spread quietly at first. A handler mentioned the transfer to a colleague. A veterinarian described the space to someone who had long argued that retired K9s deserved structured decompression. A photo surfaced online, no captions about heroism, no dramatic filters, just a wide room with 6 retired working dogs lying in a loose formation, sunlight cutting across the floor. People filled in the story on their own. Questions came next. Who funded it? What program supported it? Whether the department was involved, whether it was safe, whether it was reckless. Officials visited again, this time less skeptical and more curious. They walked through the facility slowly, observing instead of scanning for violations. One officer stopped near North and crouched instinctively, though he did not reach out. North's eyes lifted, measured him, and then returned to scanning the doorway. The officer stood back up, unsettled not by aggression but by presence. "He's still working," the officer said quietly. "No," Evan replied. "He's choosing." The distinction was not understood immediately. Criticism arrived louder than curiosity. Some called it irresponsible to house multiple high-drive retired K9s together. Others questioned the finances when word leaked that Evan had liquidated his savings. A reporter asked him directly whether he regretted risking everything for animals that would not live another decade. Evan did not answer in speeches. Instead, he invited professionals inside. Behaviorists observed how the dogs self-regulated. Trainers watched how they negotiated space without escalating tension. Veterinarians reviewed health metrics that improved steadily within weeks. The dogs were not deteriorating without structured work. They were stabilizing. The pacing dog no longer traced tight lines. The one that startled at sudden touch positioned himself in open spaces where nothing could surprise him. Another who had once guarded food bowls ate calmly within sight of the others. North remained what he had always been, the axis around which the room settled. He did not dominate. He did not posture. He simply existed in a way that held the edges steady. One evening, after officials left and the building returned to quiet, Evan sat beside North without speaking. North shifted closer, pressing his side lightly against Evan's leg for the first time. It was not affection in the soft sense. It was alignment. Evan rested his hand briefly against North's shoulder and left it there. Outside, the narrative grew louder. Articles framed Evan as either reckless or heroic. Donations were offered and declined. Invitations to speak were ignored. The public wanted a dramatic explanation for why a man would empty his savings for dogs marked as not recommended. Evan never corrected them. The dogs did not need praise. They needed completion. Weeks later, when the official transfer documentation finalized permanent placement, the paperwork described the facility as a specialized retirement care unit. It was a bureaucratic phrase, clinical and tidy. Inside the building, nothing changed. North still chose the doorway at night, though now he slept more deeply. The others shifted positions freely. No one waited for a command. And what began as a man taking all of them quietly became something else. Not a rescue, not a rebellion. For dogs who had spent their entire lives waiting for the next instruction, the absence of one was not confusion anymore. It was peace. Time changed the place in ways no one announced. It showed first in the dogs' bodies, not in dramatic moments, but in how they moved when they thought no one was watching. North's stride shortened slightly as months passed, not from injury, but from age finally being allowed to exist without urgency. One of the younger retirees lost the tight edge in his shoulders and began sleeping on his side, legs loose, mouth open in a way that would have once been unthinkable. Another stopped tracking every footstep and chose a corner near the window instead, watching light move across the floor rather than exiting. Evan adjusted without comment. Routines shifted gently. Walks grew shorter. The ground grew softer. Medications were added quietly, not as an admission of decline, but as part of care that no longer needed justification. North noticed everything. He still positioned himself near the entrance, though now it was less about guarding and more about habit that felt comforting. When new dogs arrived from other departments, older, slower, confused by the sudden quiet after years of duty, North did not challenge them. He watched. He allowed them space. When one froze in the doorway on his first night, unable to cross into the open room, North stood, walked back, and lay down just inside the threshold. The dog followed. No one trained that behavior. It came from experience. The place gained a reputation without Evan's help. Handlers began calling before retirement dates were even set, asking if there might be space someday, not because the dogs were unmanageable, but because they did not want their partners ending up somewhere that would ask them to forget who they were. Evan listened, asked questions, and sometimes said no. When he did, he gave names of other facilities, other people he trusted. He did not expand beyond what the dogs could hold. This was not growth. It was containment. The truth about Evan's past surfaced eventually, the way truths do when enough people circle the same quiet fact. Someone recognized his name. Someone else recognized the way he moved. Articles appeared trying to frame his decision as an extension of his former life, as if discipline and sacrifice explained everything. Evan did not correct them. What mattered was not who he had been. It was what the dogs needed now. North slowed more noticeably in his later years. His hearing dulled slightly. His vision softened around the edges. Evan rearranged the building without announcement, moving beds closer to doors, adjusting lighting to reduce shadows. North accepted the changes without resistance, trusting the space the way he had once trusted commands. On the night North did not rise when the others shifted positions, Evan noticed immediately there was no panic, no rush, no emergency lights. Evan sat beside him, back against the wall as he always had, and rested a hand on North's shoulder. North breathed steadily, eyes half-lidded, body loose in a way it had never been when Evan first met him. The other dogs gathered nearby without instruction, forming a loose arc that felt instinctive rather than trained. North did not need reassurance. He had already finished. When morning came, the building did not feel empty. The dogs moved differently, quieter but not distressed. One took the doorway position without being prompted. Another settled near the center of the room, checking angles before resting. The order remained, not because North was gone, but because what he had modeled stayed. Evan handled the paperwork the same way he had handled everything else, without ceremony. North's name was added to the wall near the entrance, not engraved, just written simply, where light fell in the afternoon. Visitors sometimes asked which dog had been the leader. Evan never answered that directly. They led each other, he said. He just showed them how to stop. The facility did not close. It did not turn into a memorial. Dogs continued to arrive, to settle, to complete their stories without being asked to perform gratitude or redemption. Evan remained where he always was, on the floor, part of the routine rather than above it. People eventually stopped asking why he spent his savings. The answer had never changed. This was not what he gave up. It was what he kept. For dogs who had spent their lives being necessary, the greatest gift was not to rest alone, but to rest without confusion, without being told they were finished before they were ready to be. And in a quiet building filled with steady breathing and unguarded sleep, that was enough.